when I put out this album, I'm gonna go gold because the time is now. The time wasn't right then, you know what I'm saying? It was a little off time. The time is now.
That opening line wasn't just a confident proclamation. It was the first shot fired revealing the darkness behind the legend known as Big L. He was once seen as an unpolished diamond from Harlem, someone who could cut steel with his rhymes. But along with that sharpness came another front one that simmered beneath the surface, dangerous and never fully told broken relationships, silent betrayals, and accusations that were never erased. Mase was once a little brother, Cam'ron a teammate, Nas a silent ally. But why did they all turn away or remain eerily silent when Big L fell? Could it be that behind all the praise and the spotlight, Big L was the one who burned down his own closest circle? Or was he simply the last one brave enough to live truthfully in a world full of lies? Don't go anywhere, because the answer is coming up next. Big L versus Mase. When brotherhood turned into barrels pointed at each other, every legend has a blacked-out chapter. For Big L, that chapter didn't begin with a rap battle, but with a whispered accusation behind prison bars. Big L did it. But before the darkness consumed him, there was a time when names like Mase Cam'ron or Bloodshed used to call him brother. They were Harlem kids who grew up to the same rhythm of rap, who shared 16-bar verses in back alleys, who believed that music would be their way out of the gun-smoked dead ends. And then one day, they turned their backs. It all started with a brotherhood that once seemed unbreakable. In the early 1990s, when New York was still divided among forming empires, Brooklyn belonged to Biggie Queens. To Nas, Harlem was fertile ground, awaiting a voice to represent it. Big L, with his razor-sharp punchlines and uncopyable flow, was the first to emerge from there. But instead of keeping the spotlight for himself, he formed a group, Children of the Corn, including Mase, then called Murder Mase, Cam'ron Killa, Cam Bloodshed, Cam's cousin, and McGruff. They were like a Harlem version of Wu-Tang, raw, honest, and hungry. Big L wasn't just the leader, he was the fire starter. Mase once admitted that it was Big L who took the group around to rap, who opened doors to radio stations and freestyle sessions. He brought us all over Bobo and other places to rap, Mase recalled. By then, L already had underground fame. From mixtapes it appeared with Lord Finesse on Yo MTV Raps in 1992, signed with Columbia Records in 1993, and released his debut album Lifestyles Ove de Poor and Dangerous in March 1995. The album reached the 149 on the Billboard 222 on the top R&B hip-hop albums chart. Not bad at all for an artist with virtually no commercial support. Then came the turning point. In 1996, Mase branched off, signed with Bad Boy Records, and instantly became a superstar. Feels So Good What You Want. A wave of hits took Mase to the top within just 1 year. In the eyes of the media, he was the new face of Harlem. But to Big L, the one who had once guided Mase before the fame, the spotlight shining on someone else may have been the first blinding light and a stab to his pride. For Mase, it wasn't all smooth either. He shared on the It Is What It Is podcast that his relationship with L began to shift after he got famous. Before that, L was the one representing the whole crew. But once I rose, the tide shifted. That's when things started getting weird. Then he dropped the bomb. Big L began to imitate him. According to Mase, Big L copied his compound rhyme structures, his syllable flipping, and his flow techniques. When you rhyme two words simultaneously, that's not an easy technique. I saw L reusing the very same structures I was developing, Mase said. At first it was just suspicion. Then came the criticism. And finally, confrontation. He decided to speak directly to L, but that conversation never happened. Big L, true to his Harlem nature, didn't respond with words, but with actions. According to Mase, L called Fat Joe a Bronx icon and member of DITC, digging in the Crates crew close to L, asking him to help out. Then came the fateful night at Tunnel, New York's legendary nightclub. I was just standing there when Fat Joe approached. No greeting, no talking. Just thick air, Mase recalled. In a separate interview, Fat Joe confirmed the story. Joe said L came to him, said he needed to handle some serious business, never said who the target was, and Joe, out of loyalty to DITC, followed. When he saw Mase in front of him, Joe froze. I saw two Harlem guys facing off, and L looked at me like, "So what, you're not jumping in?" Joe said. But it didn't end there. On another night, Mase was out with his close friend God Shamgod, who later became an NBA coach, when a gunman suddenly pointed a weapon and shouted, "I'm gonna kill both of y'all." Mase threw his watch under a car tire and pulled Shamgod to run. Fortunately, nearby police caught the robber. But then Mase's phone rang. Calls from friends who were in the same jail as the attacker. They said that during a group beating behind bars, the robber confessed Big L was behind this. That was when everything spiraled out of control. Mase believed Big L not only refused to forgive, but deliberately wanted to teach a lesson. That explains why after Big L's death in 1999, Mase almost never mentioned his name again. No tribute, no social media post, no statement. Just decades of silence. And Fat Joe. He made it clear I felt like I got dragged into a battle that wasn't mine. After that day, Mase never looked at me the same. One wrong step, and Joe became a living witness to how fame power and Harlem's history could turn brotherhood into war. But the big question remains, was Big L truly the one who started it? Or was it just a defensive reaction from an elder when people said he was washed up? When all the spotlight turned to Bad Boy? When those he had once mentored came back and said, "You're copying me"? How would an artist from the streets of Harlem, where pride is worth more than money, respond? In 90s, New York hip-hop, where brotherhood was more fragile than a diss track, truth didn't always depend on who was right or wrong, only who survived after the last word. And between Mase and Big L, that last word was never spoken. One lies beneath the ground, and one still lives to tell the story, but never the full story. Big L vs. Cam'ron, the definition of a fractured brotherhood. If the conflict with Mase was a sudden deep cut, then with Cam'ron, what Big L faced wasn't a stab, but a slow numbing coldness, one that stretched from the past all the way to the present. No accusations, no public statements. Yet Cam's silence in all the years following Big L's death is precisely what haunts people most. It's an emptiness no one could fill, a void that once carried the name of brotherhood. After the situation with Mase, many believed it was the lowest point in Big L's relationships with his Harlem brothers. But in reality, it was the fracture with Cam'ron that best illustrated how even a genius like Big L couldn't hold on to the hands that once gripped each other's shoulders through New York's corners. And like all Harlem tragedies, this story too began with kinship. Cam'ron, real name Cameron Giles, like L, was born in Harlem, raised in poverty, and forged in an environment where talent was the only weapon to step out of the shadows. When Children of the Corn formed in 1993, Cam was still known as Killa. Cam, a raw, fierce MC with skills to rival anyone in the group. If Mase carried the slick bad boy energy and Big L had the classic sound, then Cam was a mixture of both wild, magnetic, full of swagger. Under Big L's leadership, COC quickly became a whispered name in New York's underground. They had no contracts, no media presence, but at block parties and freestyle sessions on local radio, they were the Harlem kids who feared no one. Big L, already signed to Columbia, at the time held the highest rank in the crew. And like any big brother, L wasn't just the front man, he was the example, the role model Cam looked up to. The unexpected death of Bloodshed in 1997 in a car accident nearly dissolved the group. Bloodshed wasn't just a fellow rapper, but Cam'ron's cousin, deeply close to both L and Cam. That loss was the first crack weakening what was already a fragile bond. From there, Cam began to take his own path. In 1998, Cam released his debut album, Confessions of Fire, under Entertainment, Jaw Epic. Though not as explosive as Mase's Rise, the album sold over 500,000 copies and gave Cam a solid foothold in the rap scene. His style grew increasingly flashy and colorful, in complete contrast to Big L's gritty underground sound. And that difference didn't stop at music. It extended to values. Cam began affiliating with Rockefeller, while Big L founded Flamboyant Entertainment and remained loyal to the streets in every bar. Strangely, throughout that entire period, there was not a single feature between Cam'ron and Big L, even though they had been teammates in the same group with the same starting point. No mention, no tribute after Big L's death in 1999. Although Cam often referred to Harlem as his sacred home, Big L's name seemed to vanish from his public memory. Why was that? Many believe it was Big L's overwhelming shadow during the COC era that made Cam feel the need to break free. In an environment with clearly defined ranks, L was the uncrowned king of Harlem rap, the one who opened doors, but also perhaps unintentionally created pressure. When bloodshed passed and the group dissolved, maybe Cam saw a new path, one where he didn't have to walk behind anyone anymore. So he chose to go it alone, without looking back. There were also rumors that when Big L began negotiating a joint deal with Rockefeller in early 1999 with rappers like Herb McGruff Sion and even Jay-Z Cam, was not on that list. Though this remains speculation, if true, it could explain why Cam kept his distance. A quiet wound, but deep enough to stop him from ever looking back at the name of his old brother. Perhaps what makes this conflict so haunting isn't that it exploded, but that it never even ignited. Mase and L had confrontations, words exchanged. But between L and Cam, there was only silence. No harsh words, but also no goodbyes. And that's why when Cam became a legend in his own right, leading Dipset and setting Harlem ablaze in an entirely new way, many wondered if Big L had lived, would Harlem have had room for both? Or was a bigger musical clash silently waiting to happen? Maybe Big L felt the distance too. Maybe he knew he and Cam stood in two different worlds, one cold and underground, armed with knife-like punchlines, the other soaked in champagne fur coats and purple-pink beats. But instead of confronting it, they chose silence. Like two old friends lost in an overcrowded party, neither making the move, neither wanting to meet that familiar gaze. That is the real tragedy. Not that two men who once cared for each other turned enemies, but that they could have been two dragon heads of Harlem. And now only one is left alive. One who has never spoken, and one who can never answer. The battle between Big L and Cam'ron spilled no blood, but it's precisely that silence which leaves the deepest impression and raises the most questions. Will Cam ever stand before a mic and say that name, Big L, the way Harlem folks still whisper of a legend taken too soon? Or will he keep it a nameless shadow? A memory Harlem can never quite put into words. One thing is certain, silence has its own echo. And in this case, it echoes louder than any diss track ever recorded. Big L and Nas, the silent player in a tense game. No back and forth, no diss tracks. But the relationship between Big L and Nas felt like a chessboard that was never flipped over, the kind of tension where two verbal assassins of New York seem to understand that just one misstep, one word spoken at the wrong moment could make everything collapse. Nasir Jones, known as Nas, was born and raised in Queensbridge, just a few subway stops from Harlem. In 1994, when Nas released Illmatic, he was hailed as a storytelling genius, a poet writing over boom bap beats a true Shakespeare of the streets. At the same time, Big L dropped Lifestyles of Da Poor and Dangerous, considered one of the most hardcore debut albums of the 1990s, silencing the entire underground scene. Two lyrical beasts, two different boroughs of New York in the same golden era. And yet, strangely, no collaborations, no handshakes, no battles, no praise, and no critique. They existed like two magnets repelling each other, not out of hate, but because they simply couldn't get close. Big L was known for his razor-sharp technique, lethal wordplay, and the way he could end a verse like he was slicing the beat with a knife. Nas, on the other hand, leaned into introspection, storytelling finesse, and the ability to turn reality into legend through lyricism. They weren't alike, but they both occupied the same position, the most authentic street representatives of New York in rap. And it was that overlap that made people assume either they would collaborate or quietly clash. One of the most controversial pieces of evidence for tension between the two came from a 2004 interview clip quoted at the beginning of this story. When asked about an incident involving Nas, specifically when he got jumped, an unnamed rapper recalled Nas went back to Harlem and said Big L was the one who did it. There was no official confirmation, but the statement lit a spark in the hip-hop community, because it echoed something everyone had always sensed but never said aloud. There was an unspoken distance between Nas and Big L. Throughout his short career, Big L never publicly mentioned Nas in a negative light. On the contrary, he was often named as one of the most dangerous MCs in New York, according to Jay-Z, Fat Joe, and even DJ Premier. Still, the fact that there was never a collaboration between Nas and Big L remains an unanswered question. In an era where major MCs like AZ, Cool G Rap, and Raekwon had worked with either Nas or Big L, The void between these two stood out even more. A popular theory in the underground scene claims that Big L's upcoming deal with Rockefeller Records in 1999, where Jay-Z was dominating, might have been what made Nas keep his distance. At the time, Jay-Z and Nas were already entering the slow burn of a long-standing feud, which would later erupt in the infamous Ether versus Takeover era. If Big L joined Rockefeller, he would naturally become part of Jay-Z's camp, something that might have made Nas feel unsafe. Or perhaps Nas was simply cautious around people like Big L, too sharp, too competitive, too dangerous to stand beside. In rap, talent doesn't always translate into alliances. Sometimes recognizing each other as equals means knowing to keep distance. The bitterest truth is this: both Nas and Big L once harbored ambitions to reign over New York. But unlike Nas, who had a solid support system from Ill Will to Columbia, Big L always walked alone. After being neglected by Columbia, despite lifestyles, selling nearly 200,000 copies in its first year, L founded Flamboyant Entertainment to take control of his own career. That independence made him solitary and made people like Nas unsure where to stand. Nas never said a word about Big L after his death in February 1999. No public condolences, no tweets, no tribute, not a single bar that mentioned him. Meanwhile, rappers like Jay-Z, Fat Joe, Talib Kweli, even Eminem, who wasn't close to L, all offered their respects. That silence left the community wondering Nas wasn't just an outsider in this story. But maybe Nas is carrying a kind of memory he doesn't want to unearth. Maybe between him and Big L were conversations never recorded, looks exchanged that needed no explanation. Maybe silence was Nas's way of keeping Big L in a separate place, not under the spotlight, but in a quiet corner of memory, where only those on the same latitude can understand each other. Whatever the reason, the gap between Nas and Big L remains like an unfinished beat one, where no one dared to lay the first verse. And that's what keeps listeners wondering. If Big L had lived, would they have clashed on a legendary track? Or would the quiet tension remain forever unnamed? Because in hip-hop, not every war needs gunshots. Sometimes one glance, one pause, one rumor is enough to draw a battle line. And Nas, playing the silent one, might be holding the biggest secret of anyone who ever passed through Big L's life. Harlem, the street code, and the dark side of Big L, New York in the 1990s, was the epicenter of the rap game. But Harlem was where all lines were drawn in blood. Here, reputation wasn't just built on the mic, but on life-or-death decisions. Whose side you took, how you kept your word. And when the world fell apart, whether you stayed silent or stood your ground. Big L, more than anyone, was the full embodiment of that overlapping boundary half-street poet whose punchlines could cut steel. Half a man of the code, the kind of code never written down, passed only through glances and actions. Harlem raised L with both its beauty and its venom. He was born on 139th and Lenox, raised in a cramped two-bedroom apartment abandoned early by his father, with his mother raising 3 sons alone. In that context, rap wasn't just an escape, it was identity. The only way a boy named Lamont Coleman could be called by another name, Big L. But rap never scrubbed the Harlem dust from his shoes. Even as his career gained momentum, as lifestyles of the poor and dangerous brought him into the spotlight, L never severed his ties to the block, especially not with the NFL crew coordinated by his older brother Big Lee. NFL wasn't football. It was a loose network where relationships, debts, and hierarchy intersected in a system outsiders could only describe with one word: dangerous. The story of Rage, a name tied to Big Lee and the Harlem Squad, is the clearest example. Rumor has it, Reggae once confronted a young member of Junior Mafia at a Chinese restaurant, stared him down coldly, and snatched the chain off his neck. A chain many say was the same one Biggie once wore on the sitcom Martin. From that moment, it wasn't rap beef anymore. Junior Mafia erupted, hunting Reggae to reclaim that symbol of honor. But Reggae didn't back down. According to street stories, he sent a message: if you want it back, take it in blood. At the center of that storm, Big L wasn't just an uninvolved rapper. He showed up at Tunnel, New York's most infamous Sunday nightclub wearing the chain borrowed from Reggae, likely that chain. Was it a cocky flex or a cold statement? I'm not afraid of anyone. Whatever the intention for those who could read signals, it was a way of choosing sides, or at least stepping onto a path where things could escalate far beyond music. And they did. Whispers turned into direct accusations. with names places and collect calls from behind bars. They beat him so badly, he confessed Big L did it. Mase's account pulls back the curtain, exposing a Big L that many fans only knew through lyrics, but Harlem knew much more intimately. The issue wasn't about right or wrong in the moral sense. It was about how Big L chose to live true to Harlem's code, absolute loyalty, instant reaction, and never letting anyone walk on his name. Fat Joe, who got pulled into the clash between L and Mase, said something worth pondering. L looked at me like, "You jumping in or just standing there?" That's a question, with only two answers. In Harlem, standing on the sidelines means you've already picked a side the other side. At the same time, Big L was relentlessly building his artistic legacy with bullet-straight focus. After Columbia dropped him for being hard to market, L started flamboyant entertainment. No top 40, no R&B hooks, no radio formulas. While the rest of New York was chasing commercial appeal, L doubled down on core hip-hop and dropped Ebonics, a Harlem-drenched track that deconstructed Black American slang into a vivid rap dictionary. The Source ranked it among the year's top 5 indie singles, and the Heads called it a street linguistics anthem. Even surrounded by layers of hostility, he held fast to one belief: hip-hop must stay hip-hop, unbent, undiluted. But that refusal to compromise also trapped Big L in an impossible position. He was a mic genius, but also a man of the code tied to Big Lee Ray J NFL. So when Damon Dash extended an offer to bring L into Rockefeller, Jay-Z's rising empire, L didn't go alone. He wanted to bring the whole squad, Herb McGruff Sion, an ambitious wolf pack. Was that loyalty or a burden? A collective vision or self-sacrifice between two worlds, one where he wanted to be seen as a true superstar, the other where he couldn't or wouldn't cut ties with Harlem. In New York, questions like that rarely have safe answers. In his final interviews, Big L still spoke about rap with the eyes of someone who had never fallen out of love with the craft. But around him, the reasons to fight were no longer just artistic. For someone with debts in the shadows, a chain borrowed at Tunnel, and someone calling from prison saying he named you. Climbing up in rap was like walking between two cliffs. On one side, Rockefeller record deals a visible mainstream future. On the other, Harlem, where every debt had to be settled by the code. And Harlem's code always comes due. Not on an album release date, not on tour schedules. It arrives in its own time, sudden, cold, and non-negotiable. Especially when the name Big Lee L's brother was also too deeply mapped into the conflict. The more loyal you are, the more dangerous it becomes. The more you try to let both worlds coexist, the easier it is for both to collapse. The truth is, Big L chose the hardest path to preserve pure rap dignity while upholding Harlem's code of honor. But you can't stand on both battle lines forever without paying a price. And in Big L's case, that price wasn't counted in album sales, it was paid with his life. In the end, all the shadows closed in on him at the very moment Rockefeller's door had just opened, when Wolfpack was still only a rough draft. Big L no longer had the chance to choose which world he belonged to. But did his death close the chapter on all violence and unpaid debts? Or was it just the beginning of suspicions that were never answered? And most importantly, who will carry Big L's legacy? The friends who stayed silent, or the recordings that never lost Harlem's sharp edge? The death of Big L and an unfinished legacy. Not every legend gets to witness their own peak. For Big L, the light that seemed to be appearing at the end of his career path was suddenly extinguished on a cold February night in 1999. No warning, no grand announcement. Just 9 bullets fired into his face and chest right at the corner where he grew up, Lenox Avenue and 139th Street, the place that once launched his rap dream, and also the place that stole the life of one of the sharpest lyricists New York ever produced. Big L's death wasn't just a shock to Harlem. It was a brutal reminder of the fragile line between art and street reality. A week earlier, he had just completed a demo to sign with Rockefeller, a turning point that could have changed his entire life. And that of the Wolfpack. Damon Dash already had a seat prepared for LJZ, once admitted, "If L had lived, I'm not sure I'd be the greatest." In another reality, Big L might have become the flag bearer of the post-Nas Biggie and Hov generation. But that reality remains forever unwritten. Police arrested Gerard Woodley, a childhood friend once close to Big Lee, as the suspected shooter. But the case went nowhere. Witnesses retracted. Evidence fell short. Years later, Woodley became involved in other shootings and was eventually shot dead by an unknown assailant in 2016. His death closed the final door to finding the truth, if there was even a truth that could be named. Still, even without a confirmed triggerman for many in Harlem, the answer was already woven into the context. To them, Big L's death wasn't the result of a rap beef, but the final link in a long chain of consequences, stretching from the clashes involving Raja Big Lee, NFL Junior Mafia. What appeared on stage was only a fraction. The submerged part, where handshakes came without contracts, was what truly determined life or death. That's also why when L was buried, many public figures didn't attend the funeral. Many who once swore loyalty suddenly went silent. Because everyone knew, say one wrong word and Harlem might not forgive you. For L's mother, Gilda Terry, the pain wasn't just losing a son. It was the silence that blanketed everything after his death. No one stepped up for justice. No one truly opened up. To her, he was a son, a family member, her pride. But to the industry, he seemed to become a forgotten icon. Columbia didn't reissue his old album. Rockefeller didn't release the unfinished projects. Flamboyant entertainment. The label L founded himself was left suspended in time. Even those who had once lost to him in freestyle battles avoided saying his name, as if hip-hop history would be easier to write by leaving out someone too dangerous, too uncontrollable like L. So what's left? The answer came from the fans, the ones who refused to let Big L be forgotten. They created websites, painted murals, released unreleased mixtapes. His freestyle sessions with Stretch and Bobbito spread across the internet, from obscure forums to YouTube channels, with tens of millions of views. Ebonics became a lesson in street language. Put It On revived as an anthem of non-compromise. And the posthumous album The Big Picture, released in 2000, sold over 72,000 copies. In its first week, something even many mainstream rappers couldn't achieve. Next-gen rappers from J. Cole, Kendrick Lamar to Joey Bada all name Big L as an inspiration. Not because of the length of his career, but because in that brief span, L managed to do something nearly impossible: maintain originality in an era being swallowed by commercialism. He didn't rap for fame. He didn't change his flow to chart. He didn't blend with R&B to create radio-friendly hits. Big L followed one rule: only the lyric must be sharp, must be real, and must kill every rapper who stepped into the cipher. But perhaps L's greatest legacy doesn't lie in his music. It lies in the questions his death forces us to confront. Can an artist truly leave behind their environment without betraying their roots? Can you stay loyal to your friends while pursuing personal success? And when forced to choose between Harlem and Rockefeller, between brotherhood and glory, which choice is the right one? For L, the answer might have been, don't choose. He tried to hold on to both until it was no longer possible. And that very persistence is what turned him into the most unfinished icon of New York hip-hop. Someone who never left the block he grew up on, yet never got to fully live out his biggest dream. Ask Harlem about Big L, and no one needs to open Wikipedia. They'll just point toward the corner of 139th and Lenox. There you'll find a mural, a few sticks of incense lit every month, and a line that still echoes from old mixtapes. You can fool some of the people, some of the time, but you can't fool all the people, all the time. Big L never tried to do that. He just told the truth. But the truth sometimes is what gets you killed the quickest. Big L never got to finish telling his story, but every bar he left behind still echoes like fragments from a legend stolen far too soon. And even now, the most haunting thing isn't his death. It's the truths no one has dared to say out loud. If this story made you pause and reflect, help spread it. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, and leave your comment, because every interaction is a reminder. Big L deserves to be remembered, not just as a rapper, but as a truth that was never fully told.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.